Hello, good morning. Are you guys ready to hear the adventures of Nancy and the drugs and the kissing of British rock stars? Are y'all ready? Thank you so much for the hosts, Caden, Terror, and Heartless Shroom. I hope you guys doing well. It's good to see you guys. It's also good to see I'm Lord Hades. How you guys doing today? I hope you're having a good Saturday so far. And if it's not good, then it'll get good. I have to go to work today, so I figured I'd do a morning stream to finish this up because we only have about 50 pages left. And obviously it's just so exciting, this book. The most exciting. No, it won't get good. I hope it do, though. Alright, so the last time we saw Nancy, she was falling into a bog of quicksand because she had found some marijuana in a tower room or something. Like some little, like, ruined house. It's very strange, everything that's happening. Okay, here we go. We're just gonna jump right in. Let's see if Nancy will dump Ned and take up with her British rock star. Let's see. You know, they're taking a break right now, her and Ned. Classic weed and its quicksand progression. Don't do weed, kids, because then you end up in quicksand. That's the moral. That's the moral here. Okay. Alright. Pardon me. Chapter 13. A Whispered Warning. Help! Help! Nancy screamed, giving way to blind fear. She knew that her cries might bring the very people she had come to spy on, maybe even the spooky cultist who had sent her the elf bolt. Excuse me. But any risk seemed preferable to the horror of her present predicament. Again and again she called out with no response. As she paused for breath, Nancy became aware that the piping music had stopped. Too late, she realized that its only purpose must have been to lure her into the deadly quaking bog. For several moments, Nancy hovered on the verge of utter panic. Shrill screams rent the air, and with a convulsive shudder, she realized that the screams were coming from her own throat. If she were to survive, she had to keep her head. With a steely effort of will, Nancy took a firm grip on her nerves and began to assess her position. By now, her floundering had sunk her at least a foot into the muck. Until she calmed down, she would soon be up to her knees in the slimy morass. I must stay still, she decided. It seemed unlikely that anyone other than her unknown enemies would be wandering on the moor at this hour, but sound travels farther at night in open terrain she had always heard, so there was at least a faint chance that her cries might be heard by a distant passing motorist on the highway. Nancy took a deep breath, then yelled as loudly as she could. She was hideously aware that with every passing moment she was sinking deeper and deeper into the bog. Her skin crawled as she pictured herself waist-deep into the bog, then shoulder-deep and neck-deep until finally... Shuddering, Nancy thrust such thoughts from her mind. Somewhere she recalled reading that by lying flat, a victim trapped in quicksand could spread his weight and thus survive much longer. But it seemed a desperate move, and she was reluctant to put it to the test, save as a last resort. She decided to continue trying to attract attention. Again she screamed for help as loudly as she could, and again. Suddenly, Nancy's heart gave a leap. Was that a sound she'd just heard? Yes, someone was calling back to her. A man's voice. This way! Over here! Nancy cried frantically. Her eyes caught a distant gleam of light. The glow seemed to widen and grow brighter, and presently she realized that someone was shining a flashlight on her. The beam shifted away to take the glare out of her eyes, and Nancy was at last able to make out the man who was holding the electric torch. There was something familiar about his voice, but it was only minutes later, after his strong hands had reached out to pull her slowly but surely out of the squelching muck, that she finally recognized who he was. Alan Trevor, the reporter. Nancy sank, gasping and trembling, into his arms, babbling her thanks. How did you happen to hear me?" she quavered. "I was snooping around the old engine house, checking out some rumors and trying to dig up a story on drug dealing in Polpenny." Trevor waited in turn for Nancy's explanation of the ghastly plight from which he had just rescued her. "You've saved my life," she acknowledged shakily, "and I'm more grateful than I can say, but could I ask one more favor?" "Why not?" When you write your story about what you saw back there in the engine house, could you leave me out of it, at least for now?" There was a brief silence. Nancy expected him to bargain for information in exchange. Instead, he merely said, "Okay. The important thing right now is to get you back to the castle." The reporter not only accompanied her to the spot where she had left Lisa's bicycle, but insisted on following her on foot all the way back to the castle courtyard. Then, with a quiet "good night," he vanished into the moonlit darkness. Nancy was surprised and touched by his behavior. Luckily, no one was awake in the castle, and Nancy was able to get up to her room without being seen. She showered and sank gratefully into the bed, leaving until morning the task of brushing all traces of her night's adventure from her jeans and shoes. Next day, on the pretext of feeling a bit unwell, Nancy went to visit the local medic. Lisa offered to drive her to his office, but Nancy declined, saying, "I'm hoping that a stroll in the sunshine and fresh air will make me feel better. Just give me directions and let me ramble." The physician, Dr. Carradine, occupied an old stone house on the outskirts of Polpenny. He turned out to be a tall, sandy-haired man with tired eyes that suggested a busy practice. "Lady Penvillin called to tell me you were coming, Miss Drew," he said when Nancy was seated in his surgery. "What seems to be the trouble?" "Nothing with me, thank goodness. It's Lisa herself that I'm worried about. Would it be all right to consult you about her health?" Normally the answer to that question would be no, but I realize you two are old friends, and she has mentioned to me that her mother's very concerned. Carradine frowned and steepled his fingers. "Frankly, Lisa's not well. She's very run down. I've prescribed a course of vitamins and food supplements to build her up physically, but her problem may be emotional." Nancy nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that's occurred to her mother too, but is there any chance she could be taking something harmful to her health?" Carradine's frown deepened. "You mean drugs?" "No, something that Lisa doesn't even suspect may be harmful." Nancy took out the aspirin bottle that she had filled with Ethel Bosny's elixir. "This is an herb tonic she's been taking. It's probably perfectly wholesome, but, well, perhaps there's something in it that disagrees with her, or that she may be allergic to." The doctor uncapped the bottle and sniffed its contents. "Hard to say offhand. I've never tested Lisa for allergies, but I suppose I have this analyzed, and I'll let you know the results." Nancy thanked him, not mentioning that she had removed the bottle from Lisa's room and poured out the undrunk glassful after Ethel Bosny had left. "One more question, Dr. Carradine. Lisa walked in her sleep last night. What could cause that?" "I'm no psychiatrist, Miss Drew, but it sounds like an emotional problem she can't cope with. Something that festers in her subconscious and disturbs her rest. Let me know if it continues." As she trudged back to the castle, her thoughts distracted her from enjoying the bright morning and the beautiful scenery of the little Cornish fishing village. As sometimes happened when investigating a mystery, Nancy had the feeling that an important link in the evidence was staring her in the face. But what was it? Even more depressing were the lurid news stories about her and Lance Warwick. Nancy had tried to shut them out of her mind, but they were becoming too blatant to ignore. Hopefully, and against her better judgment, she had picked up a couple of papers at a village newsstand to see if the topic might have faded from public view as quickly as it arose. Instead, she saw the rumor mills were busier than ever. Back at Penvillin Castle that afternoon, as she huddled in an overstuffed chair in the sitting room, Nancy realized miserably that the story was now being played up in newspapers all over Britain. She had already heard herself described on the television news as Lance Warwick's newest girlfriend, a Yank female private eye who combines curves with brains. Most painful of all was an article in a rock magazine that a castlemaid brought back from the nearby resort town of St. Ives. It claimed to tell the inside story of Lance's latest sizzling romance and informed its avid readers that the American girl detective, Nancy Drew, had fallen head over heels in love with the Rock King in New York and had pursued him across the Atlantic, hoping to wangle a proposal of marriage. Almost as bad in Nancy's eyes was the way her stay at Penvillin Castle was played up and sensationalized. The Golden Mab was dragged in to hype her detective role. One tabloid even hinted that Lord and Lady Penvillin might be mixed up in a high-society criminal ring suspected of dealing in stolen art objects. Another news story, even more startling to Nancy, suggested that she had come to the castle to investigate sordid rumors of a satanic witch cult. Several press photographers had already made vain trips to the castle. As the day wore on, the phone rang incessantly until Hugh ordered it left off the hook. There was little doubt in Nancy's mind who was responsible for the flood of publicity. Hadn't Lance himself said that Jane Royce was the best press agent in the business? Got a sixth sense for what'll make the headlines, that girl. She knows how to squeeze every drop of press coverage out of any angle that comes along. Nancy had to squeeze her eyes shut tight to keep from crying whenever she thought of that night on the town with Lance. And the tender way their lips had melted together. Obviously, he'd been using her from the very first. Nancy, dear, you mustn't let this business about Lance Warwick upset you so, Lisa crooned. It'll blow over as quickly as it started. Nancy squeezed her friend's hand gratefully. At least it was a step in the right direction, she reflected, for Lisa to forget her own troubles. At one point, Lisa even suggested calling in Ethel Bossany to give Nancy a soothing massage. It's really relaxing, Nancy. Ethel learned physical therapy while she was teaching sports. Nancy smiled wanly. I don't think so, Lisa, but thank you. All right, then, suit yourself, she said with a playful smile to offset her crisp tone, as if chiding a stubborn child. But I want you in tip-top shape for my dinner party tonight. Tonight? Good grief, Lisa, why didn't you warn me? Who's coming? You might say my only friends in Polpenny. Ethel, for one, and Dr. Carradine, plus the local business tycoon, Ivor Roscoe. Squire Roscoe, they call him, and his wife, Diane. Nancy promptly snapped out of her downbeat mood. The upstairs maid helped her do her hair and laid out her chic black party dress. Ethel Bossany, who arrived shortly before 7, evidently had also done her best to dress for the occasion. Gone were her tweed suit and stout brogues, replaced by a livid purple gown, almost indecently low cut, and a jangly copper necklace. She had even applied lipstick. Next to appear was Dr. Carradine. Nancy found him easy to talk to, and learned that he was a widower. Ivor and Diane Roscoe arrived last. Diane, a quiet brunette, was younger than her husband and attractive enough to have been a movie star. The squire himself was a heavy-set man of 40, with a leonine mane and trim-pointed beard. As they chatted at the candlelit dinner table, the talk turned to Cornwall and its traditions of seafaring and mining. Ivor, by the way, owns the Polpenny Tin Mine, Hugh remarked to Nancy. How interesting, she told the others what she had learned from Colonel Tremaine. Squire Roscoe nodded. It was Cornish tin and copper that brought the Bronze Age to Britain. Not much ore being taken out nowadays, though. We exported many of our best miners to America. My father was the last owner to operate the Polpenny mine full-time. Now it's shut down. Which doesn't mean Ivor's retired, Hugh added with a chuckle. He runs a London ad agency along with several other businesses. He's also active in the arts, Ethel beamed approvingly. You must get him or Diane to show you around their private gallery, dear. I'd love that. The guest had politely avoided any reference to the embarrassing news stories about Nancy, but now she boldly decided to bring up one aspect of those stories herself. Ethel had just given her an opening. I suppose you've seen the Golden Mab at the Tate? She asked Roscoe. I'm told she was the goddess of the witches. A jarring silence ensued. It was broken by Diane hastily murmuring, I imagine everyone in England's seen it by now, with all the press and television coverage it's received. Do you think it's possible a mate to it could have turned up here in Cornwall? Nancy persisted. Roscoe shrugged curtly. Afraid that's beyond my expertise. A man named Ian Purcell claims to have seen such a statuette, Nancy went on, and I understand he stayed here in Polpenny when he was getting over his drug habit. Was he a patient of yours, Doctor? Dr. Carradine nodded. The rock musician? Yes, he came to me for treatment, but I couldn't persuade him to take the full cure. Still, he seemed to be recovering. When dinner was over, the ladies adjourned to the drawing room while the men lingered for cigars. Nancy was startled when Diane drew her aside. I can't explain just now, Miss Drew, she whispered with a nervous glance over her shoulder. But please be careful. Polpenny's a very ingrown community. You may stir up a great deal of trouble. Was this intended as a tactful hint, Nancy wondered, or a veiled warning? Next morning, she decided to venture again into the village, despite the flood of publicity. She felt she would be taking the cowardly way out to hide her face at the castle. A stroll would also enable her to pay another visit to Dr. Carradine. How nice to see you again, Miss Drew. The medic greeted her in his consulting room. I was wondering if you might have had any report yet on that herbal elixir. Yes, the chemist called just a short time ago. He says it seems to be composed of harmless vegetable ingredients, although of course that still leaves the possibility of an allergic reaction. Nancy walked away thoughtfully from the doctor's house. On the village high street, she stopped short, her heart thumping. A sleek red sports car had just pulled up near the harbor. A lean, sardonically handsome young man with spiky blonde hair jumped out and came striding toward her. "It's Lance," Nancy realized in sudden panic. The rock star flashed a brilliant smile and reached out to embrace her. "Nancy, love!" His arms dropped as he saw how she froze. "Darling, what's wrong? Do you need to ask after all that sleazy publicity your talented press agent has stirred up?" Lance looked genuinely astonished. "What difference does that make? Have you any idea how many birds would give their eye teeth to bask in the limelight as Lance Warwick's newest sweetheart?" "Not this bird," Nancy retorted, stung that he should dare to offer such justification. She turned to walk away. Lance started after her, reaching out for her arm. "Look, my sweet, I took this gig in Cornwall, even though the rest of the group wasn't too keen on the idea, just to be near you. Can you blame me if the press draws the obvious conclusion?" Nancy shook off his hand scornfully. "Am I supposed to believe that Jane Royce dreamed all this up without your full approval? Please understand once and for all, Lance, I am not one of your groupies." End of chapter 13. I have a feeling I have a lot to catch up on. So let me do that. We were on a break. I have so much weed in my pockets. And one of my Goodreads the other day discovered I had rated this book 4 stars. It seems so perfect. Oh, no. This is the press guy is another guy. It's not. Alan Penvillin is still a dude. Don't trust Mick Jagger, Billy Idol, David Bowie, Rockstar guy. That's like 3 times the English. All with different regional accents. I'm trying. When I read it in my head, he sounded American. Hello, the internet. I'm under the impression that Ned doesn't read or doesn't know how to read. I base this claim on nothing. LOL, so... Whoa, fan, it is okay if you get the vapors from this writing. Fan yourself. Oh, okay. Did CV slip you one of her books when you weren't looking? I don't know what is... This is not a PG... This is not a family-friendly Nancy Drew book. Get Lance to give Nancy a massage. Ned! This chat is out. That's the next chapter. This chat is out of control. I'm okay with this. Now HS just saying how fine other people are. So fine. Hey Celeste. Hades/Loki. It's all the same, am I right? One is charming, delightful, and a bad guy you just gotta love. And the other is Loki. That was funny. Hades, lord of the underworld. Loki was god of mischief. You want Hala. She was goddess of the Norse underworld. One of his 4 children. Lance! Trouble in Paradise. Lover's Tift. I realize Loki and Hades aren't the same. I was trolling. Hey, Spartan. How's it going? You have caught me reading a Nancy Drew book that is not family friendly. Nancy's smooching on British rock stars and dealing with cocaine. It's just craziness up in her. Fighting with her British boyfriend while her other boyfriend is at home. Let me respond to a text message real quick. Okay. So Nancy finally went wild. Nancy's just 50 Shades of Grey. Yeah, Nancy finally went wild. All right. We've got about 40 pages to go. 5 chapters, 40 pages. Here we go. Chapter 14, Night Sight. This time, the Rock King did not follow her as she hurried off down the high street. Nancy's cheeks were flaming. She felt as if the whole village of Polpenny must have overheard their quarrel. Why on earth did I have to go and lose my temper? She asked herself regretfully. Excuse me. In her wretched, almost tearful mood, Nancy was momentarily tongue-tied when Alan Trevor stepped out onto her path. "Come with me, Miss Drew," he said softly. "There's a tea room just round the corner. I promise not to ask you any questions." Almost numbly, Nancy let herself be led away. "That was very kind of you, Mr. Trevor," she said once they were seated and she had regained her composure. "Now I'm doubly in your debt. I'm sorry I was so short with you the other day." "Don't be silly, I'm the one who should apologize. I've probably seen too many loudmouth reporters in films. I'm not like that at all. Really crossed my heart." Nancy was able to smile. "What are you like?" "Just a typical thick-headed Cornishman?" They both laughed. "Which reminds me, if I could tempt you into having lunch, they do a very nice line in Cornish pasties here." Nancy discovered that there were delicious dollops of meat and potatoes baked in dough, which Cornish housewives used to pack in their minor husbands' lunch pails. As she sampled one, Nancy also discovered she was hungry. "Be honest, Mr. Trevor," she said presently. "Alan, please," he interrupted. "All right, Alan. You must have spent some time asking questions around Polpenny trying to dig up material for a story about me." He looked sheepish. "That's how I earn my living, Miss Drew." "Nancy, please. I only wanted to ask you if you have any idea why the villagers will not speak to Lady Penvellyn." The reporter looked startled, then thoughtful. "Is that a fact? I didn't realize it. Are you enough of a native for them to trust you and tell you why?" Alan Trevor chuckled. "Hard to say in Cornwall. I was born and raised in Mousehole, where they say the last Cornish speaker was born, which is not exactly the same as being a native of Polpenny, but I'll see what I can find out." Nancy decided to press her luck. "While you're at it, perhaps you'd be kind enough to check out a crazy story that ran in a tabloid called the UK Flash. It hinted at a local witch cult. Could you find out who wrote that and why?" Trevor's eyes glinted with interest. She knew he was mentally connecting her question with what had happened at the engine house. To quote a Yank phrase, "You've got it, Nancy." When she returned to Penvellyn Castle, Nancy saw a sightseeing bus parked in the courtyard. A uniformed guide was herding a group of tourists into the castle. On the spur of the moment, she joined them. The tour guide's memorized spiel contained enough facts to hold her interest, but Nancy had something else in mind. As he droned on, she found an opportunity to slip away from the group. Scurrying down a branching corridor, she headed for the locked room. As a part of her detective skills, Nancy had learned a good deal about locksmithing, and in an emergency, she could pick the average lock. This one, on the stout iron-bound oak door, however, resisted all her efforts. It was obviously too massive and unique in design to yield to an ordinary picklock, but as she was about to replace the lock-picking device in her handbag, something about it caught Nancy's eyes. The pick was glistening with fresh oil. "Well, well, well," she muttered. "Somebody must have gone in here recently." As she walked into the great hall of the castle, Landreth the butler hailed her. "Ah, Miss Drew, you've just arrived in time. A gentleman wishes to speak to you on the phone." "Did he say who he is?" Mr. Lance Warwick, ma'am. This is the 3rd time he's called." Nancy's chin shot up and her sapphire eyes turned icy. "Please ask him not to call again." "Very good, Miss Drew." Lisa had overheard them. She caught up with Nancy on the stairs. "Don't be upset, Nan," she begged, slipping an arm around the teenager's waist. "I'm not. I just saw him in the village, Lisa, and it was rather unpleasant. My own fault, probably. Never mind. Ethel Boston's coming over this evening. She promised to give us a seance." "A seance?" Nancy looked at her friend in surprise. "You mean she's a psychic medium?" "Good question. All I can say is she goes into trances, and she's told both Hugh and me some rather odd things. Anyhow, it should be fun." Nancy was skeptical. Nevertheless, she joined in the experiment, and the Penvellyns and their 2 guests joined hands around a small table in the drawing room after dinner. All lights had been extinguished except for twin candles glowing on the mantel. Miss Boston had bought a special mood record to play on the castle's old-fashioned phonograph. It featured a soprano vocalist singing in a sweet, reedy voice to the music of a Welsh harp. Nancy found the overall effect distinctly eerie. Presently, a faint moan came from Ethel Boston's lips. This was followed by a woman's voice quite unlike her own hoarse, hearty tones. "Nay, I am not a witch." You lie, ye black-hearted rogue. Torture me if ye like, but I'll never confess to such foul lies. Nancy felt the skin of her arms prickling into goose flesh. Her eyes met Lisa's. Even in the semi-darkness, she noticed that her friend was looking pale and uneasy. Both girls gave a nervous start as the voice issuing from Ethel's throat suddenly broke into a shrill, long-drawn-out scream. Hugh leapt to his feet. The music had ceased playing and the needle was clicking soundlessly in the groove. He lifted the phonograph arm and switched on the lights. Ethel Bosny had opened her eyes. Lisa and Nancy were holding her hands and stroking her. "What happened, Ethel?" Hugh inquired. I'm not sure," she croaked in a hoarse, terrified voice. "I had the most ghastly vision." "Of what?" "I saw a black-horned devil figure. It was shooting arrows of fire at me and at Nancy." Lisa gasped. Nancy's throat had gone dry as she thought of the elf bolt she had found in the lavender envelope. Nancy lay awake that night, unable to sleep. At last she got out of bed and tiptoed toward the window. The faint sound of a boat engine had just reached her ears through the night air. She pressed her face to the pane, peering out into the moonlit darkness. To her amazement, a boat was gliding in toward the foot of the headland on which the castle stood. Presently it passed out of view, too far below to be glimpsed beneath the steep rocky slope. Nancy waited for 10 long minutes, but the craft failed to reappear. She was about to withdraw from the window when she saw something else that made her freeze in amazement. A slender gowned figure with flowing blonde hair was walking slowly out toward the point of the headland. "It's Lisa!" Nancy gasped. "She's sleepwalking again!" End of chapter 14. Hi, hey Janto Regan, I see you popped in. I'll catch up in just a second. And then I'll answer your question. Hang on. Are you sure you can handle all that steamy hotness that is the last 40 pages? The next book is going to be real tame. Oh yeah, it's going to be Secret of the Old Clock. She doesn't even run over the child. This book would have had the child hit and had drugs planted on them. The rest of the book would be her trying to hide the body. Oh man, I want to read this. Don't spoil it for me. It was Ned in revenge for her affair with Lance. A definite Newbery Award nominee. Not edgy enough. The 2020 update of Nancy Drew's story, Nancy's Life of Crime. When I was in grade 4, there was a Newbery Award on a novel, and I found it annoying because it covered the picture. Nancy Drew / Catwoman crossover. This book came out, let me answer your question. This is Edgy Nancy, and it came out in 1985. Copyright 1985 by Simon & Schuster. Oh, never mind. Tara answered your question. How's it going? Forget Nancy Gone Wild. This is Chat Gone Wild. Thank you for the claps. Did you read all 76 before this? No. So I am reading the books. So I have collected I have many of the original hardcover yellowbacks, but I decided a few years ago that I wanted to collect all of the books that the games are based on. So I think you've been watching Sunny play through the games. So I'm reading the books in the order of the games. So this is the book that Curse of Blackmore Manor is supposed to be based on, but there have been obviously a whole lot of changes from the book when they made it into the game, because other than a few characters, there's really not many similarities other than location. But that's the series, the books the Nancy Drew books I've been choosing to read are the ones in order of the games. So that Lulu's not in here. So I've read all of the books that games 1 to 10 are based on, and so this is game 11's book version, because all of the games were at least loosely based on a book. Bobo became Lulu. So yeah, the next Nancy Drew book I read will be Secret of the Old Clock, because that's what game 12 is based off of, obviously. So, anyway, that's kind of what I've been doing. But no, so I haven't read 76 game books on stream before this. But that's kind of been... Even the newer games were based on books, yes. I'm trying to find out if the 2 Dossier games were based on books, which were the 2 little side series books, or games that Her Interactive made. But I haven't gotten an answer from Her Interactive on Twitter about that yet. So, but yeah, even up to Midnight in Salem is is at least loosely based on a Nancy Drew book. You're waiting for the Secret of Kapu Cave book. I think that book is called Mystery on Maui, if I remember right. At 10, you were huge on reading Edgar Allan Poe and Shakespeare. I'm not a huge fan of either of them, to be honest. I think Twelfth Night is probably my favorite Shakespeare, but even then it's kind of like, I'm kind of about Shakespeare. I like Edgar Allan Poe a little bit more, but I'm still not a huge into that. If we want to talk about Jane Austen books, though, Emma is my favorite. Just throwing that out there. Okay. I'm going to move along. Chapter 15. Undine. Undine? Got some Undertale references up on her. Okay, Chapter 15. Undine. The sudden realization of her friend's danger convulsed Nancy into action. In frantic haste, she pulled on her jeans, sweater, and moccasins, then ran out into the corridor, screaming for Hugh. He appeared in the doorway before she reached their suite. "Lisa's heading for the cliffs," Nancy cried. Seconds later, they were running out of the courtyard. Lisa's wraith-like figure was visible in the distance. Hugh lengthened his stride, his long legs pumping like pistons, and soon left Nancy far behind. Her heart gave a lurch of fear. Lisa would soon reach the brink of the cliff. Nancy breathed a silent prayer. As if in answer, her friend paused, then raised a hand to her forehead in a gesture of perplexity. Within seconds, Hugh had caught up with her and enfolded her tightly in his arms. Where am I? What are we doing out here?" Lisa was muttering as Nancy joined them. "We decided to take a midnight stroll, don't you remember?" Hugh joked tenderly. In her dazed state, Lisa seemed to accept this far-fetched explanation. Nancy was thoughtful as they returned to the castle. Was it possible that Lisa had faked both her sleepwalking episodes to arouse her husband's sympathy? The idea seemed hateful to Nancy, and none too plausible. Surely her friend was not that skillful an actress to stage such terrifying and utterly convincing scenes. During the night, another idea came to Nancy's mind. It had to do with the connecting link idea she had been groping for. Rising early, Nancy went to the castle library and looked up hypnosis and suggestion in the encyclopedia. Afterward, she used the telephone. Alan Trevor had told her he roomed in Penzance. Nancy called the nearest office of the Western Sun, which turned out to be in Plymouth, and learned his phone number. Then she called him. "Nancy, what a pleasant surprise," the reporter crowed. "Good thing you called. I have some information for you." "I have something to tell you too, Alan." "Good. Then meet me at the tea room in Polpenny at 10:30 and we'll swap news." Nancy was impatient for this meeting. As they ate breakfast, the reporter began. "You asked me to check out that witch bit in the UK Flash. Well, it was written by a bloke named Coburn, an old Fleet Street hand. My boss knows him, so he called and asked where he got that yarn." "What did he find out?" "Coburn claimed there actually were such rumors floating around a couple of years ago." "About Penvillin Castle?" "Not exactly. They involved the old Lord Penvillin, Hugh Penvillin's uncle. Apparently, he was rather an old troublemaker. Rumors were circulating among his London pals that he was into witchcraft and devil worship. Coburn admitted to my editor he was just trying to rework that old gossip." "I see." Nancy pondered a moment. "That's very interesting, Alan. Thank you." "Well, there's more to come. My boss suggested I check out the local history angle to see if there's any tradition of witchcraft in Polpenny, so I went to the library in Penzance." "And is there?" "Is there ever? Back in the early 1700s, during the witch trials, the mistress of Penvillin Castle was a Lady Phoebe Penvillin. Somehow she got herself accused by the official witch hunters." Nancy's eyes widened. "What happened?" "They tortured her into confessing that she was the leader of a witch coven here in Polpenny, and before she died, she incriminated several villagers, who were later burned at the stake." "That's horrible." Nancy shuddered. She was hearing again the strange, unearthly voice that had come from Ethel Bosny's lips during her trance. "I'm not sure whether all that helps you any." Alan studied her face. "I mean, you are trying to unravel some sort of mystery, aren't you?" Nancy nodded. Yes, and if I succeed, I'll tell you as much as I'm allowed to, Alan. Then she described what she had seen from the castle window during the night without mentioning Lisa's sleepwalking. Are you any good at boating? She added. The reporter chuckled. My dear girl, my old dad skippered a fishing trawler, and you ask me that? Don't you know that Drake, Hawkins, and all the great English sea dogs were West countrymen? Then let's rent a boat and see if we can find out what that boat I glimpsed last night was up to. On one condition. Name it. That you'll come out with me this evening. Agreed, Mr. Trevor. Within half an hour, they were sailing windward out of the harbor in a small dinghy. Alan at the tiller steered them skillfully between the two stone breakwaters. Later, as they neared the jutting headland, he lowered the sail and unshipped the oars to row them closer inshore. Can you remember the boat's exact course? Nancy shaded her eyes and gazed up at Castle Penvillin to locate her bedroom window. Then she pointed precisely. It was in that direction. Even with the sea so blue and relatively calm, the gentle waves flung up foam and spray as they splashed against the jagged rocks. Alan approached the rocks with great caution. They're like deadly fangs, he remarked. They can devour a boat like matchwood, or even a large ship if the wind's up enough. Look, Alan, Nancy cried. See that shelving outcrop about 10 feet above the water? What about it? Do you see an opening just below it? The reporter squinted intently. The dazzling sunshine and the shadow of the outcrop made it difficult to discern the details of the rock formation, but his face suddenly reflected her own excitement. You're right, there is an opening. He maneuvered as close to the rocks as he dared, then dropped a hemp fender guard over the side and anchored the boat in place by wrapping some rope around a granite spur that stuck out above the water. Think you can make it from here? Alan inquired. I'll try if you will. While he held their craft steady with a boat hook, Nancy scrambled nimbly ashore over the rocks, slippery with seaweed. Alan followed. Though wet from flying spray, both were exhilarated. Having made it safely this far, the rest of the way seemed easy by comparison. The jagged cliff face offered ample footing as they clawed their way toward the opening. Alan entered first, then reached out a hand for Nancy. She switched on her penlight, which she had brought from her shoulder bag, and shone it around. They gasped at the sight it revealed. They were in a dank cavern littered with pieces of nautical gear. Several large empty casks, coils of rope, a pair of rotting oars, moldy canvas, a rusty cutlass, and equally rusty tools that might have belonged to an old-time ship's carpenter, and a brass-bound sea chest stenciled with the name Undine. Must be the ship it came off, said Alan. But how did it get here? Wrecker's work, I imagine. Nancy threw him a puzzled glance. Say that again? Haven't you ever heard of the old Cornish wreckers? When she shook her head, he went on. They were land pirates, back in the day of sailing ships. In bad weather, they'd light fake beacon fires to lure ships close inshore. Then, when the vessels piled up on the rocks, they'd loot the wreckage. Nancy shivered. Sounds inhuman. Those were cruel times. Back then, wrecking and smuggling were major Cornish industries. What about that? Nancy aimed her flashlight at a strange marking on the grotto wall. It looked like the head of a pig. Alan stared at it, half amused, half puzzled. Beats me. Maybe that represented the contemporary image of His Majesty's Coast Guards. Nancy chuckled, but could not help feeling that the odd drawing might be significant. The cavern appeared not to extend very deeply into the cliffside, and they could find no further clue to whatever last night's visitor, or visitors, might have been after. Nevertheless, Nancy's thoughts were busy as they sailed back into the harbor. Alan's mention of smuggling had given her a possible new lead to the mystery. Before returning to the castle, she stopped in to see Constable Kenyon again. Could you tell me if Ian Purcell was ever in trouble with the law over drugs? She inquired. Not here, he wasn't. I'd have to check with Central Records at Scotland Yard to know for sure. If you would, I would appreciate it, said Nancy. Constable Kenyon was too young not to respond to a pretty face. Besides, this American girl, by all accounts, had quite a record at cracking difficult criminal cases. She might be onto something big. I'll see what I can find out, Miss Drew, he promised. When she arrived back at Penvillin Castle, Nancy made a phone call to Huntley and Dawlish, the law firm her father had mentioned with offices at Lincoln's Inn, one of London's famous Inns of Court. Mr. Dawlish answered promptly. It is a pleasure to hear from the daughter of such a distinguished American colleague. How can I help you, Miss Drew? Nancy described what she and Alan had seen in the cliffside cavern. Am I right in thinking that Lloyd's of London keeps a record of all British shipwrecks? They do indeed. At any rate, of ships that they themselves have insured. Could you possibly find out if they've any record of an old-time sailing ship called Undine? "I've friends at Lloyd," said the barrister. "If they do, I'm sure there'll be no difficulty in digging up a full report." Nancy thanked him and hung up. Lisa was intrigued to hear about Nancy's date that evening. Late that afternoon, as Nancy was preparing for a refreshing bath, she was called to the phone. It was Constable Kenyon. "I've just learned from Scotland Yard, miss, that Ian Purcell does have a record. He was arrested last year for drug pushing, but was released for lack of evidence." Nancy was thoughtful as she bathed and dressed. When Alan Trevor called to pick her up, he gazed at her in obvious admiration. She smiled at him as she got into the car. "Where are we going?" Her heart skipped a beat as he replied, "To watch the crowned heads perform at Porthcurno." Into chapter 15. Nancy has all the boyfriends! Ned, Lance, reporter Alan, and then the constable thinks she's cute and that's why he does stuff for her. What is this game? Oh my.
Good morning, this sounds like her CJD Steve, haha, shrug, right, I have been waiting forever to say this so as to not interrupt her.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paige, for the resub. This does sound like the Kerr book. Let me catch up, hang on. I've got a lot to catch up on. I wonder if Minette says "so rude" in the book. I don't remember. I do think I read that one already, but yeah. Oh, I totally understand, Celeste. Could this book have been ghost-written instead of by Carolyn? Well, Carolyn Keene is a pen name. There was no Carolyn Keene. There were multiple writers of the Nancy Drew series, still are multiple writers of the Nancy Drew series, and they've just all used the name Carolyn Keene. But Carolyn Keene is not a real person. Jane Austen, I can see why you enjoy her writing so much. Perfect thing to put you to sleep. She's way better than, I do not like Charles Dickens. I'd read Shakespeare over Charles Dickens any day. Who knows who wrote this gem? Someone who did articles for Playboy. I don't know if you're supposed to reuse tea bags, but I'm on day 3 of this bag because I stole it from a hotel and it's the only one I have. Hey, CJ. Oh, Lord. Yeah, the tea just gets weaker, I think. Thank you for shouting out CJ and HS. Thank you for shouting out Terror. More men picking up Nancy. She has no shame. Thank you for shouting out Janto. The tea is brownish. It should be fine. Undyne is a fish. It makes sense. Fake bacon fires. I messed that up. Something crazy. Jane's Game Portal. Is Nancy Drew your favorite book series, or is it still a series? Oh, A Series of Unfortunate Events is still definitely my favorite series. Yeah, model match. Now the police want her, but not for a crime. Okay, be safe feeding your rats. Refreshing bath. Her heart skips lots of beats. As Hades said, the police are after her, so I guess this is where 50 Shades of Grey / indie crossover is at. This sounds like Cursed CJ Steve. I have to take a picture of Boo's teeth? Okay. I am Carolyn Keene. Hey there. Pen villain name. I'm glad there are multiple boyfriends to dilute the Ned. Hey Moocher, how are you? I'm sure there is some record somewhere of who wrote which book. I don't know if you'd have to like maybe contact Simon and Schuster for that info, because you know, I don't know who like keeps records of that. Welcome back, Paige. Happy Saturday to you as well, dear. Agreed on Charles Dickens. Hey, Boo. Okay. We have, I think 3 more chapters. Let me see. 16, 17, 18. Yep, that's it. 3 more chapters. And we gotta wrap a whole bunch of boyfriend stuff up in 3 chapters. Here we go. Y'all ready? There's not, I feel like the mystery is being overshadowed by all the boyfriends that Nancy has in this book. Oh, yeah. We do know that Mildred wrote many of the first 30, but, like, these ones that were written in, like, the 80s and stuff, I have no idea. Okay, here we go. Chapter 16, The Grotto Symbol. Nancy stared distractedly at her escort. What's this all about, Alan? Are you just after another news story? Is this why you asked me out? He reached out impulsively for her hand. No, believe me, Nancy. I do have a reason for taking you to the concert, but I'd rather not say why just yet. Will you trust me? Nancy swallowed hard. All right, if that's what you want. After all, we did make a bargain. Good. Shifting into gear, he drove out of the courtyard. In addition to all its other features, Cornwall was also a land of flowers, Nancy had noted. Their scent filled the soft night air, but as she and Alan rode through the darkness, her thoughts were in a turmoil. She suddenly realized she had come to like this friendly young Brit reporter very much, but was he too using her for his own selfish reasons, just as Lance Warwick had? She bit her lip as the rock star's face rose in her mind. The thought of him made her blood race, throwing her emotions into even greater confusion. Whom did she really want to be with tonight? Alan Trevor or Lance? Miserably, Nancy found she couldn't answer her own question. The Minack Theater, where the concert was to take place, caught Nancy by surprise. It was an open-air amphitheater carved from a rocky cliff that sloped down into Porthcurno Bay, not far from Land's End, the westernmost tip of England. Under the stars, with the murmuring dark purple sea for a backdrop, it offered a breathtaking spectacle. Eager rock fans were already overflowing the theater's capacity and lining the cliff tops. Alan led Nancy down a secluded path to the narrow beach, which was less crowded, and managed to rent folding chairs near the performers' dressing room. A roar of applause went up as the crowned heads emerged in costume into the brilliantly lit stage area. But Lance suddenly stopped short. He had just caught sight of Nancy with Alan Trevor. Nancy sensed that he was already keyed up for the night's show, and seeing her with a rival had evidently triggered a flare of emotion. Lance strode toward them, his jaw jutting angrily. What the devil are you doing with my bird? Alan rose swiftly to face him. Cool it, mate. Stagehands and the rest of the group moved between them fast before a fight could erupt. Sorry about that, Alan whispered to Nancy as he took his seat again. Do you want to leave? Fortunately, all spotlights were on the stage now, leaving them in darkness, which hid her confusion and embarrassment. No, of course not. Nancy squeezed her hand. Good girl. The crowned head's performance was every bit as exciting here as if it had been in New York. Lance, if anything, seemed to project himself across the footlights with even more violent intensity. But later, as she and Alan drove back to Pulpenny, Nancy found she could remember very little of the show. The pounding beat of the music, the colorful costumes and psychedelic lights, above all her own turbulent emotions, had left her with only a blur of wild images. When he stopped his car in the castle courtyard, Alan slipped an arm around Nancy's shoulders. You're still wondering why I took you to the concert tonight? Yes, I am. I reckon I wanted to see with my own eyes how you feel about Lance Warwick. And what did you learn? The young reporter shrugged helplessly. I still don't know. All I know is that I'm mad about you, Nancy. He drew her close and kissed her. Nancy resisted at first, then found herself yielding willingly to his embrace. When they said goodnight moments later, she was less sure than ever which of the two she found more attractive, Lance or Alan. Next morning, partly to divert her unruly thoughts, Nancy went to visit the Roscoes. Lisa had given her directions, and their beautiful Tudor-style manor house within sight of the village was impossible to miss. Ivor Roscoe, whose business schedule seemed not all that demanding, was at home, and so was his wife Diane. They received her in their sunlit sitting room over tea and biscuits. Well, and how is your detective work progressing? Nancy thought she had caught a sarcastic undertone to her bearded host's remark. In a way, that's why I'm here, she replied, to ask you a question about that tin mine. My dear Miss Drew, fire away. The underground workings were quite extensive, I suppose? He frowned, obviously intrigued by her question. Indeed they were, but why do you ask? Is it possible one of the tunnels might have extended as far as the castle headland? Ivor Roscoe looked startled. No, I hardly think so. I'd have to check the company blueprints to be sure, but most of the workings ran northward, under the moor. Nancy had hoped to find Mrs. Roscoe alone and in a mood to explain her cryptic remark the night of the dinner party. Since there was no chance of that, she soon made an excuse to leave. Ambling through the steep, cobbled streets of the village, Nancy pondered the puzzle of the Seacliff Grotto. Why had the nocturnal boatman gone there? A connecting tunnel to the mine might have provided an answer, but now it seemed Nancy, love. The Titian-hair teen came out of her pensive trance to find herself face to face with Alan. Alan, she gasped, then burst out laughing. I was so wrapped up in my thoughts I never even saw you coming. So I gathered from that frown on your face. Together they strolled toward Polpenny Harbor. Alan, Nancy said, does much smuggling still go on around here nowadays? The reporter shrugged. Some. Dope from the Caribbean, for example, and there's always the odd case of French wine or brandy being sneaked in across the channel. Brandy? Nancy stopped abruptly as a wild thought flashed through her mind. Alan, are you game to take me out to that sea cavern again? Love to, just say when. I'll have to go back first and change into something more practical. Make it after lunch, say 2 o'clock? At the castle, Nancy had just finished chatting with Hugh and Lisa and was about to rise from the lunch table when the butler summoned her to the phone. The London barrister, Mr. Dawlish, was calling to report what he had learned about a sailing ship called Undine. My friend at Lloyd's says the brig Undine sailed from Boston in 1702, bound for Bristol, but it stopped at Cork, Ireland to pick up an archaeological treasure. What sort of treasure? Nancy put in tensely. A recently unearthed figurine. It was being sent to Cambridge University for study. Unfortunately, Undine never reached Bristol. She was believed to have foundered in a storm somewhere off the western coast of England. Then both crew and cargo were lost? Despite her excitement, Nancy tried to keep her voice even. Yes, but a passenger did survive. A young American girl named Phoebe Harwood. Phoebe? Phoebe Harwood? Nancy's heart was thumping. That's a tremendous help, Mr. Dawlish. Thank you ever so much. Nancy could hardly wait to get back to the cavern. Alan was waiting on the dock, and their dinghy was soon gliding seaward. They moored the boat to the rocks as before, then clambered into the cliffside grotto. Both had brought flashlights. Are you going to tell me now about this sudden brilliant inspiration you had? Said Alan. Nancy shone her beam at the snouty pig face on the wall. Liquids like brandy or rum used to be shipped in large casks, right? He nodded. So? Do you know what those casks were called? Sure, hogshead. Alan broke off as his jaw dropped open. Hogsheads. Correct. So let's check on those hogsheads right over there. We already did when we came here before. They're empty. Then let's find out what's underneath them. The casks were standing on an old tarpaulin. When both were cleared away, a narrow crevice was revealed in the rocky floor of the cave. It appeared to slope downward at an angle. I'll go first, said Alan. He tied some of the ancient rope around his waist, and Nancy let it out as he squirmed down through the hole. Presently he shouted back up, Come on, it's safe, I'll catch you. Nancy slid out of the narrow passageway into his arms. When he set her down, she saw that they were standing on the narrow bank of an underground stream which flowed off into darkness. Let's explore it, Alan. He shook his head. Not now, this wouldn't be safe. The tide is starting to come in. We could be trapped without scuba gear. When's the next low tide? Tomorrow morning? Nancy grinned. Meet you at 9 a.m. sharp then, on the dock. End of chapter 16. Okay, let's see. Catching up. 3 more racy chapters to go. Is there no Ned? So, earlier in the book, Nancy says that she and Ned are taking a break to see other people and figure out if they want to actually be together or something weird like that. I thought this was a dating sim. I gotta leave, Okay, have a good day, Celeste, although you're probably already gone. Who knows who wrote these? Probably only the publisher knows, yeah. That seems sketchy. Nancy's so thirsty. I'm glad Ned is not an option. This is awful, I know. For the last time, Nancy is ace. Hello, 9Y Yearning. How are you? Cool it, mate. OMG. I'm mad about you, Nancy. Have some sausages. I was blushing. This is I feel a little uncomfortable at times reading this. It's just so silly. This is good stuff. Nancy, OMG. Now you know why she likes series of unfortunate events. How many men can Nancy date in one book challenge? I love that book. Brandy Nancy wants a drink. Brandy, she thought, my favorite singer. Brandy, what a fine girl. She wanted you alone in a cave, Alan. Nancy, expert on liquor containers because shut up. Nancy. So much we never knew about Nancy. Dear Lord, I know, that's how I feel reading this whole thing. Thank you for shouting out Paige and the claps. I was taking a break. OMG, this is my new favorite Nancy Drew book. Silly equals steamy. V translated. This is so tame, though. I mean, it's weird for Nancy. I mean, I know. Okay, I get it. It is tame, and I have read many books that have way more steam than this, but it's just like in the context of a Nancy Drew book, this is like some of the last stuff you expect. And yeah, I mean, and there's so much talk of drugs in this book too, which is something that you just don't expect out of a Nancy Drew book. It's just so strange. Many books. No, okay, I won't say I've read many books. I have read books. I feel like I should, clarify. I did read Secrets Can Kill and Nancy and Daryl's makeout session. I read that on stream too. What books are these? Yeah, it's uncomfortable with in the context of Nancy Drew. It did take a weird turn. Nancy Drew R rating. No, I mean, like, there are books with romance in them, even if they're not romance books. I've read those. I feel like I'm just making myself seem weirder and weirder the more I talk, so I'm just gonna stop. Yeah, good save. Yeah, totally. Okay. Let's press on. I need a drink. I have a headache. I feel like I need something stronger to drink while I read this. Oh, I want to read CJ's story here first. When I was in 7th grade, the local library had a book donation thing, and one of the librarians gave me this fantasy book that they said they didn't know what it was, but I should read it and tell them if I like it or not. I'm sorry, CJ. Nancy needs a tall drink like Alan, a rock star guy, or Constable. 2 more chapters for Nancy to decide which man she wants. Little did they know it was hardly fantasy and like really, really graphic adult content. Oh god. Oh no! I'm sorry for 7th grade CJ. Okay, here we go. I'm just gonna press on. You guys continue to talk about your books, and I'll catch up with you. Chapter 17. Secret Altar. Nancy spent the rest of the afternoon in a fever of impatience. Lisa sensed her overcharged mood. You haven't made up with your rock star boyfriend by any chance? She probed. Nancy smiled. No, and you mustn't draw any conclusions from the fact that I attended the Crowned Heads concert last night either. Excuse me. Then what goes on, Nan? Or shouldn't I pry? It's no secret. I've a date to go scuba diving tomorrow morning with Alan Trevor, and something tells me that could be very exciting. Lady Penvillin stretched luxuriously and stifled a yawn. The most exciting thing around here will be a tour group that's coming to the castle before noon. I'll have to try and coax Hugh out of working so hard on his book. Her friend was looking better, Nancy thought happily. Lisa's color had improved and her long blonde hair was brushed to a glossy sheen. Suddenly Nancy slapped her forehead. Oh, what an idiot! If I'm going diving, I'll have to rent some scuba gear before all the shops close. Where would be the best place to go, Lisa? Penzance, probably. Take the car. Scuba diving is a popular sport along the Cornish coast, and Nancy had no difficulty in outfitting herself with equipment. She was loading everything into Hugh's vintage roadster when she looked up to meet the curious gaze of Mrs. Roscoe. Why, hello, Diane. Imagine meeting you here. It is a surprise, but what a pleasant one. Are you planning some underwater sightseeing? You could call it that, I guess. Nancy had an odd feeling that the other woman might not have spoken at all if she hadn't been caught staring. Can I offer you a lift back to Polpenny? No thanks, I have my car. Before returning to the castle, Nancy stopped off at Polpenny Harbor to stow her scuba gear aboard the rented dinghy. Lisa greeted her as she arrived back at the castle. Got everything you need? Yes, I think so. I saw Diane Roscoe, by the way. I know, she called just a few minutes ago and told me. She sounded very interested in your scuba expedition tomorrow morning. Shortly before 9 the next morning, Nancy bicycled into the village. Alan was nowhere in sight, so she strolled back and forth on the shingle, watching the fishermen at work. By 9:30, the reporter had still not appeared. Nancy was growing restless. There was a telephone call box nearby on a corner of the high street. She decided to try his number in Penzance. She heard the phone ringing for a long time at the other end of the line without answer. On the off chance she might have dialed incorrectly, she tried again. Still no answer. Nancy figured that if Alan wasn't at home, he must have overslept and was probably driving to Polpenny at this very moment, with one foot jammed on the gas. But half an hour later, Nancy was fuming. Surely Alan hadn't chickened out. Or had he? Once again she tried Alan's number. She let the ringing go on and on, determined to make him answer. But at last Nancy reasoned, all right, so Alan isn't coming. No sense in throwing a tantrum. She decided to sail out to the cavern and explore the underground stream by herself. Squaring her shoulders, she started back to the dock, then stopped. A sleek red sports car had just driven up with a man and a girl in it. The girl was Jane Royce, and the driver, Lance Warwick, was getting out to speak to Nancy. Nancy! She faced him, unable to find her voice. I just wanted to apologize for what happened the other night. For once, the Rock King seemed to have lost his cool self-assurance. Where are you going? He added lamely. Out in a boat. May I come? Nancy shot a quizzical glance at his honey-haired companion and added quickly, Never mind her, may I come? I'm going scuba diving. Lance's lean, high-cheekboned face brightened to a smile. Terrific! That's my favorite sport. I have a full kit in the boot of my car. I always come prepared when I'm anywhere near the coast. Nancy shrugged and tried to sound indifferent. Suit yourself, then. He turned back hastily to his car. As she walked away, she heard Jane Royce exclaim angrily to Lance, Just what do you think you're doing? What's it look like, Ducky? I'm going diving. And what am I supposed to do? You really want a suggestion? Nancy stifled a smile. Lance joined her on the dock with his gear. As they shoved off in the dinghy, he began speaking urgently. I must have been out of my mind to take you for granted, Nancy love, and to let Jane Royce talk me into that stupid publicity campaign. I reckon I'm so used to that rock scene groupie mentality, I can't even recognize a nice girl when I meet one. He took Nancy's shoulder to make her turn and face him. I found out, darling, just how much you do mean to me. Will you take me back, he pleaded, and let me try to make things between us the way they were before? Maybe, Nancy said, her own eyes twinkling. But you'd better watch the tiller and haul in the main sheet, or you'll run us right into the breakwater. Lance gasped and swung the helm hard aport. On their way to the headland, she filled him in quickly on her detective work so far. Lance responded to the adventure with high spirits. Blimey, this could be the most fun I've had since that night we all got carried away at the Hammersmith Palace, and Bobo rammed his foot clear through the bass drum. It was a tricky chore getting their scuba gear from the boat into the grotto. Nancy had a brief, uneasy feeling that the hogsheads had been moved slightly from where she and Alan had left them, but she dismissed her suspicions in the excitement of their subterranean adventure. Lance slithered down the crevice first. After lowering the scuba gear, she joined him. What now? He grinned. Dive in? Let's check things out a bit first. Following Nancy's flashlight beam, they made their way along the narrow bank of the underground river. Gradually, the walls of the stream bed converged until they could explore no further on foot. Okay, swim we must, I guess, said Nancy. She had on a bikini under her tank top and jeans. While she was doffing her outer clothing, Lance changed into his wetsuit behind her back. Then both strapped on their scuba gear and plunged into the water. Fairly warm, Nancy remarked gratefully. Must be the effect of the Gulf current. The warmth indicated that the underground stream they were exploring was definitely fed from outside, which in turn confirmed Alan's belief that the level might rise considerably at high tide. Nancy had brought a small but powerful undersea lantern which served to light their way. After they had swum on the surface a fair distance, the roof of the underground passage began to slope downward until at last there was no air clearance left, and they had to don their scuba masks. But presently both were able to raise their heads again above water. They removed their mouthpieces so they could talk. Wonder where we are now, Lance said. Quite far under the headland, I should think. Minutes later, Nancy gasped in surprise. Just ahead, a cylindrical iron cage appeared out of the darkness. What on earth is that? I was about to ask you the same thing, love. She played her lamp beam over the strange contraption. It seemed to be suspended from the solid rock overhead. Its massive iron bars were rusted and slimed with moss. They could make out what looked like a hinged door. Lance grasped one of the bars and heaved himself up out of the water. When he tried the latch handle, the door opened easily. Both were amazed. "Somebody must keep it oiled," said Nancy, reminded of the locked door of the Bluebeard room. Lance entered the cage and pulled her up to join him. A short flight of ladder-like metal steps ran upward around the inside of the cage to a small trap door in its solid metal roof. "Any idea where this leads?" Lance asked her. "I can only guess. One thing's for sure, we must be underneath Penvillin Castle." As they took off their scuba gear to explore further, Nancy shivered with excitement. It was almost uncanny, she thought, how closely events seemed to be bearing out her suspicions. She felt confident that her connecting link theory would also prove correct. A musical trap had been laid for her, which almost ended fatally in a quicksand bog, but at first she had to be lured to the engine house by that gleam of light. And what better place to see the gleam than up on the castle towers at night? Assuming there was indeed a connection between the two incidents, the plotters must have known she would go up on the tower, and maybe even when, which meant that Lisa had been programmed to decoy her up there. But if so, Lisa must surely have been acting under hypnotic influence, and only one person, Nancy theorized, was best able to exert such influence. As these thoughts were passing through her head, Lance was mounting the iron ladder treads. Sounded weird. He reached up to push against the small trap door. It opened with a creak, and he climbed through the opening. Nancy followed. They found themselves in a dank stone stairwell. "Game to go on, love?" "Try and stop me." The stone steps, grooved by centuries of use, wound endlessly upward. At last they found their way to the top, only to be blocked by a plain wooden panel. Again Lance pushed, and the panel opened outward. Both caught their breaths at the sight that met their eyes. They were in a beamed and vaulted stone room, richly furnished in antique style. "If this don't beat all!" Lance tried to sound joking, but his voice was husky with awe. Nancy swung her lamp around, revealing tapestried walls with gilt sconces, heavy oak and walnut furniture that was medieval in appearance, and before a huge fireplace at one end of the room what looked like a low stone altar. On the altar, a ring of candlesticks surrounded a shiny statuette of gold, a woman glancing at a mirror held in her right hand. "The mate to the Golden Mab," murmured Nancy. She tilted her beam upward, and a huge oil portrait came into view above the mantel. It portrayed a stunningly beautiful girl, with long blonde tresses and slanty emerald green eyes, clad in the sumptuous court costume of the early 1700s. Behind her, in shocking contrast, through dark veils of smoke, loomed a goatish, horned devil. "Who's that?" Lance queried. "The bird, I mean." "The one-time witch queen of Polpenny, Lady Phoebe Penvillin," said Nancy. "She died under torture, and because of her extorted confession, other villagers were burned at the stake." Lance shuddered. "What jolly tidbits you know." "Well, here's another. She's almost an exact double of the present Lady Penvillin. Phoebe was an American girl, too. She must have been a forebear of Lady Lisa's." Nancy's gaze turned to a pile of modern-day bales and crates. The bales proved to be marijuana and hashish, while the crates contained plastic bags of cocaine. Lance gaped. "Where did this stuff come from?" "The Polpenny Witch Coven still exists," said Nancy. "Only now they're more into drugs and drug smuggling than witchcraft. Ian Purcell was recruited into the coven and got hooked. That's how he happened to see the Golden Mab." "Brilliant sleuthing, my dear," said a cultivated English voice somewhere behind them. Nancy turned and gasped. The tapestry on one wall had been pulled aside. Several people were stepping out of an alcove behind it. The speaker was Ivor Roscoe. With him were Ethel Bossany, Dr. Carradine, and surprisingly, Bobo Evans, as well as two hard-eyed men in stylish suits, each holding a gun. "Unhappily, Miss Drew," Roscoe went on with a sardonic grin, "your kind of snooping is apt to have fatal results." End of chapter 17. So the Bluebeard room had a whole bunch of drugs stashed. Does Hugh know about this, and that's why he wouldn't let Lisa in? Okay, hang on, I gotta catch up on chat. Nancy decides on Ned after all this. I was so embarrassed I read part of it, but I returned it and claimed, "Oh, I didn't have time to look at it. Sorry." Ew. Secret altar. Nancy gets sacrificed. Scuba diving skin-tight outfit. Oh my goodness, CJ. Alan stood her up. What were they thinking not taking a glance at this before giving this to me? Oh my gosh, CJ. Lance drives around with scuba gear. Really? Convenient diving gear is convenient. He's an avid scuba-er. Just like some people have yoga mats in their trunk because they love yoga, but they only go once every 6 months or so. Whoa! Kawhi feels attacked by that statement. Good lord. Don me now our scuba mask. La 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 la. Drive-ins and dives. Paint bomb music's giving me anxiety. I'm sorry. Oh, don't be nervous, Paige. You got this. Ice Chase gives me anxiety as well. I remember when I did an interview at a free roaming cat shelter and the cats were just knocking crap over. I don't remember this part of Kerr. So many drugs party. Ethel did it. I knew it. She has always been guilty. Is it really surprising Bobo was there? Thank you for the clap. Bobo want cake. Welcome for OMGing. Oh my gosh, what if there's like this cave-in and you did something stupid? This is all I could do to save myself. Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. Okay, one more chapter. Let's see how this wraps up. And if Nancy gets to be with any of the boys. She probably ends up with Constable. Okay. Chapter 18. Witchbane. Nancy's initial shock gave way to a rush of fear. Her instincts told her that these were ruthless, twisted individuals, but she tried not to panic. Lance and I seem to have interrupted a business transaction, she said coolly, pointing to the pile of drugs. So you have, Miss Drew, said Ethel Bosney after lighting a wall sconce, and we find it most inconvenient. Diane warned Iva yesterday that something like this might happen. And your two friends with guns, I presume, are drug dealers from London? They must have slipped in by posing as sightseers with the tour group, but actually came to pick up more goods. Crooks seldom trust each other, I've noticed, so you each make it a point to come and collect your cut in person. What a perceptive little busybody you are. But tell me, Miss Bosney, Nancy went on, how did you get here all unnoticed? I was visiting Lisa, my dear. It wasn't hard to slip over to this wing while pretending to let myself out of the castle. The others came through a secret priest hole passageway that dates back to the days of Cromwell and King Charles. And these drugs you're about to sell were smuggled in by the sea the night before last? Dr. Carradine eyed Nancy suspiciously. Now how the deuce would you know that? I saw the boatman from my bedroom window, said Nancy. Suddenly she caught her breath. Oh no! Did you people stop Alan Trevor from showing up at the harbor? Our London friends here attended to him early this morning, said the doctor with a thin smile. They forced him at gunpoint to swallow a powerful sedative. It knocked him out almost at once. Don't be alarmed, Miss Drew. He'll sleep it off. In point of fact, Ethel Bosney added, we were hoping his absence might discourage you, Nancy dear, but no, you are such a persistent little... Just then a key grated in the lock. The door opened and Hugh Penvellyn stepped into the Bluebeard room. He stopped short, gaping in disbelief. What the devil's going on here? My, we seem to be collecting quite a crowd of gate crashers, said Ivor Roscoe mockingly. Lord Penvellyn's face darkened with rage. So you're the filthy witch cultists who ruined my uncle. These are just the ringleaders, said Nancy. There are usually 13 in a coven, so they must have followers in the village, people who are just as much victims as your uncle was, I imagine. These witches are more interested in drug smuggling. She gestured to the bales and cartons. Her words seemed to fill Hugh Penvellyn with fresh fury. He started forward, fists clenched, but the two drug dealers stopped him at gunpoint. Don't try anything, your lordship, sneered one, unless you're bored with living in a castle. If only you'd stayed away, purred Ethel Bosny, but the damage is done now. I'm afraid we'll have to get rid of you along with these 2 other bothersome snoops. You must be out of your mind, Hugh retorted contemptuously. You can't possibly hope to get away with murder, not here in Castle Penvellyn. Of course we can, Hugh dear, if nobody ever finds your bodies. Which they won't, once we've drowned you at high tide in that iron cage down below like rats in a trap. What are you talking about? Hugh growled. Nancy will explain while the water's rising. As the 2 spoke, Nancy found herself clutching at a sudden straw of hope. She felt sure she'd heard the faint sound of footsteps ascending the stone stairs. Could this possibly be the person she prayed it was? If it was, everything depended on warning him in time and on distracting the crook's attention. Quickly she caught Lance's eye and indicated the pile of dope. Then she looked straight at the door through which Hugh had entered. "Alan!" she cried. "Thank goodness you've come!" There was instant confusion. Both gunmen turned in the direction Nancy was looking. Lance seized his opportunity. Scooping up a bale, he hurled it with all his might. It struck one of the gunmen on the head, knocking him to the floor. At that instant, Alan Trevor appeared in the panel opening. He was clad in a diver's wetsuit and armed with a boat hook. The other gunman saw him and swung around to fire, but the boat hook was already whizzing through the air. It hit the crook in the chest, and he too went down, his gun flying from his hand. Both Roscoe and Dr. Carradine lunged for the fallen weapons. Hugh kicked one gun out of Ivor's reach and felled him with a vicious right hook. Lance was subduing the doctor. Ethel Bosny dashed toward the door, but Nancy snatched up the boat hook and tripped her. Ethel went sprawling to the floor, screaming with fury. In moments, it was all over. Alan and Lance kept the prisoners covered with drug dealers' guns while Hugh went on to phone the police. "Oh, Alan, what wonderful timing," exclaimed Nancy. "But how did you manage to recover from the sedative so soon?" "The phone rang twice for a very long time," he grinned. "It was ringing practically right in my ear. By the time it stopped, I was out of my fog. When I finally got to Polpenny Harbor, I spied your dinghy over by the headland. Reckoned you can work out the rest of it." "You sure know how to keep a date," Nancy laughed and kissed him on the cheek. "Hey, don't I rate one?" Lance complained, so she kissed him too. That evening in the castle drawing room, Nancy discussed the case with Lisa and Hugh. Lisa had been deeply shaken when she learned about Ethel Bosny's role in the witch cult and drug smuggling racket. "How could she have been so nice to me, Nancy? That's what I can't understand." "You were important to her, Lisa. The toxin in her herb cordial kept you just unwell enough to need her therapy, and her hypnotic suggestions enabled her to put you in danger at any time, in case Hugh went to the police. She probably hoped to eventually draw you into the coven." Hugh revealed that his uncle had belonged to the coven. Shortly before his death, knowing that his nephew would soon inherit both his title and the castle, he had told Hugh everything. But he refused to name the other members of the coven, and made Hugh swear to take no action against the cult. Hugh had agreed, provided it ceased to exist. "But the others obviously never trusted my promise," he went on. "First, I received an anonymous phone call, which I now know was made by Roscoe disguising his voice. He threatened to create a scandal that would ruin my family name if I made any move. Then after I married Lisa, that drug dealer saw me in London one day and swore his gang would kill her if I talked." "Had you seen the portrait of Phoebe before you met Lisa?" Nancy asked curiously. "Yes, and I suppose I fell in love with her before I ever laid eyes on the little witch." Hugh smiled fondly at his wife. "The resemblance was so striking I knew there must be some family connection." Nancy related that Ethel had had cult members spread superstitious rumors in the village that Lisa was a reincarnation of the infamous witch queen who had brought such tragedy to Polpenny. "That's why they wouldn't talk to you, Lisa. They were afraid of you." "Good grief, that's hard to believe in this day and age, Nancy." "Not in Cornwall, apparently." Dr. Carradine had confessed to the police that he was the one who had introduced the coven to drugs, but Nancy believed that Ethel Bosny was the stronger character, and the one who had built up their profitable drug smuggling racket. She had drawn the 2 rock musicians, Ian Purcell and Bobo Evans, into the cult to use them as pushers. Ian had done his best to get off drugs and get out of the cult. When he saw the golden mab on a TV documentary show, he realized its mate on the cult's altar was worth a fortune, and tried to cash in on it. Ethel Bosny ruthlessly had him suspended in the iron cage at high tide after drugging him, literally frightening him out of his wits. "What a horrible woman," Lisa gasped. "She believed in her own witchcraft, I think," mused Nancy. "She slipped an elf bolt into a letter you sent your mother, probably after Sweetla offering to post it for you, and did the same thing with my letter from Lance Warwick, And after your mother called to say I might be coming over, Ethel had Bobo Evans send me tickets to the Crowned Heads concert and then plant cocaine in my purse. Lisa shuddered. This all seems like a bad dream. Hugh hugged her. The nightmare's over now, dear. Thanks to Nancy. Days later, after a week of sun and fun on the Cornish Riviera, Nancy prepared to fly home. Both Lance and Alan were at Heathrow to see her off. She didn't know that she would soon find herself involved in a very frightening mystery called the Phantom of Venice. You still haven't said which one of us you care for most, Nancy, love, Lance complained. A voice announced that it was time to board. Nancy kissed each of her suitors and replied lightly, I guess that's a riddle I haven't solved yet myself. What a flippin' tease! So rude. End of book and chapter 18. Okay, let me catch up. Nancy takes home the constable and said to Ned, he followed me home, can I keep him? Ned agrees, even though he knows he'll have to take it for walks and feed it. Good, don't forget to clip his claws. Good old Ned. Alan is immune to sedatives? Give him the sedative? What? But not Nancy's charms. Ayo! Did you hear Montana clip clapping? Welcome for young Frankenstein. Oh my! Maybe CJ was given this book by accident when he was in 7th grade. For the last time, you can't hypnotize someone to death. I think I just remembered the title out of nowhere. Oh no. Just the look at relief in V's face when she finishes this book. Believing in your own scam. Sun and fun with who? Magic in the forest. Nancy, you flirt. Clasps, clap, clap, thank you. I'm so sure I have the correct idea for the title, but it's not showing up in Google. Thank you for clapping for the book. So Nancy basically, Curse of Blackmore Manor was based on a book where Nancy spends half of it in New York getting a British boyfriend and kissing and getting cocaine in her purse. And then the other half of the book, she spends it in London with her British boyfriend going on dates. And then she gets mad at him and goes to the castle and learns about sick friend and more drugs. And then she has a reporter boyfriend. And then she has the constable have a crush on her. And then she finds the drugs and everybody's involved. And then they all go to jail. The end. And then she still dates 2 guys while she's in England. And then she doesn't tell them which one she likes better. So they've both been strung along by Nancy for however long. And then she goes home never to talk to them again. End of book. So sad we finished this book. I just summed up the entire book right there. So they obviously changed a lot for the game. That's what we've learned. They changed a lot for the game. Well, thank you for joining me on this wild adventure of Wild Nancy. The Bluebeard room. I don't know what they changed for the game. A whole lot, that's what. Alright guys, well I'm gonna call it here. I'm gonna go eat some lunch and then go to work, but I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the weekend. So who even suggested this? Well, I mean, what's funny is, like, The Curse of Blackmore Manor is such a good game, and then, like, to find out it was based on this is just so strange. Imagine if they hadn't changed the game. Oh, you found the book, CJ. Got it. I remember all of this happening when I play Kerr. Don't know about you guys. Especially the whole, like, dating 2 British boys. Maybe 3 British boys. Look at you, CJ. Good job detectiving that for all of us to know. Good afternoon, all you guys. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Take care of yourselves until I see you again. I don't know when that's going to be. Maybe like Tuesday or something. I don't know. I'll see you when I see ya. Take care. And I'll see y'all soon. Bye.